It's Friday, October 28th, 2016, for a spooky Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur, where we're going to be talking about the Seahawks and Saints with Stephen Cohen of the Seattle PI. That was just a coincidence. I did not plan it out as far as all the S's go. But here we go with another Seaside Chats from fieldgoals.com. Stephen Cohen of the Seattle PI. Stephen, how are you?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for joining us on the most important holiday weekend of all. Do you have any Halloween plans?
I should make up something right now, but I think the fact that I just said that means that I don't. No, I don't. I blew it.
You blew your cover. And
Yeah, I really did.
Do you have a dog costume of some sort?
I don't have a dog costume, but I just had to buy him a jacket because Dobermans apparently are bad at regulating their body heat when they get cold or when they get wet. So he has this pretty, cute plaid jacket that he wears around now. So there's a lot going on in my life, obviously.
Fits right into Seattle. So
yeah, absolutely.
100%. Speaking of Seattle, the Seahawks won't be playing there this weekend. They'll be playing in New Orleans to take on the Saints. And to prepare for such a game, they've obviously gone through their normal practice routine or not so normal practice routine. A lot of players this week on both the Arizona Cardinals and the Seattle Seahawks side sitting out or playing on a limited basis after their 6-6 overtime tie on Sunday night. What have coaches and players said about the practice time and the reps this week, given Sunday's marathon? Is there any sort of concern, that players getting less reps, preparing for, a big road game will affect them at all against New Orleans?
Yeah, well, it's funny because Pete Carroll came out and said, what they do every week, they take into account what happened the game before and how much playing time guys got when they're doing the practices throughout the week and when they're holding guys out or, counting reps, things like that. So maybe we're just all paying attention to it this week because it was so pronounced in Sunday night's game. But, guys like Richard Sherman and Bobby Wagner, Kelsey McCray, guys who played a ton of plays versus the Cardinals, all have said that the beginning of this week was a little rough for them, trying to get their legs back and just getting a little bit of extra rest and stuff like that. So you saw a bunch of guys being held out of practice on Wednesday, and then they came back on yesterday. And so I think you shouldn't see too much of an issue. I mean, I guess something to keep in mind is that the fact this is an early game on Sunday against New Orleans, and those 10 a.m. starts have at times Boxer had them coming out of the gates pretty slowly. So maybe, could it be a little bit more pronounced this week because these guys are coming off of a week where they didn't get quite as many reps and where they were resting a little bit more? That might be something to look for. I guess this would be one of those like causation is not correlation or vice versa, whatever the saying is there. Like if they get off to a slow start, we'll all say, oh, it's because they were, tired from the game. And that might or might not be true, but it's definitely affected the way they've prepped this week, maybe just a little bit more pronounced in a more pronounced way than it usually does.
Yeah, and I think that perhaps the most pronounced injury or injury report name on the list this week was that of Russell Wilson being limited for the first time in his entire career in a practice due to a pectoral injury that is new as of this week. It was I'm not sure about this, but did they ever confirm that was due to the hit he took on Sunday while he was mid throw on that fumble and
the
second
Chandler
of all,
Jones one?
Yeah. And is there any sort of concern that will affect Wilson's throwing motion and emotion this weekend?
Yeah. His throwing emotion, I think, is fine, and that might be just because he's going to be a father and he's got a lot going on there. But so no, he didn't. He didn't confirm that it was on that Chandler Jones hit, although I think that's a pretty good assumption that you can make. That was a wicked hit. He was kind of totally exposed, and his arm and kind of pec did get sort of wrenched backwards when he got hit there. So I think that's a safe assumption. His throwing motion will be affected. It was enough that he was limited this week in practice. The stuff that he was dealing with early in the season was all lower body. And he was able to practice through there because a lot of what they're doing in practice is not a ton of running on his position. It's just it's throwing the ball. It's going through plays and doing his drops and then getting the ball out. So this was enough of an issue where they had to go in and bring in another arm for practice. They had to go sign Joel Stave, the undrafted rookie out of Wisconsin, just to have some guys to chuck the ball around during practices. So yeah, I mean, I think this could be something that affects him on Sunday. We'll see. With Wilson and injuries, we didn't really have any experience until this year, and then it's like we've gotten all the experience. We've gotten to see him play in so many different, like with so many different things going on, whether it's a knee brace or a sore ankle, or wondering what his mobility is going to be like, and they're running read options still with him being hobbled and things like that. So this is the first one where you can kind of make the direct correlation to him throwing the ball. As much as we talk about like the lower body being part of the throwing motion and stuff like that, an arm injury, an upper body injury is just a little bit different for a guy, especially like Wilson, who likes to take shots downfield when he's given the chance. So I do think it could affect him. We're waiting. So this is Friday afternoon. We haven't gotten the injury report yet, but that's going to be coming out shortly for Sunday. And I am interested to see if he's listed as questionable or if he's, not on there like he hasn't been the last few weeks on Fridays, where they just said he's good to go, basically. So he was a little more hesitant, I think, in his press conference yesterday than we've seen him in the past, as far as just talking about like, yeah, this is going to affect me a little bit. I think he was admitting it maybe because, I don't know what the reason is. You can speculate on the reasons, but it bears watching, certainly, as we get the injury report later on this afternoon.
Yeah, and what do you obviously one of the names on that injury report will be Kam Chancellor. We can be pretty certain of that.
Yep.
But in terms of, I think that while there's a little bit more mystery around maybe someone like Russell Wilson, it seems like things are at least a little bit more defined with Kam Chancellor's groin injury and the expectations for him on Sunday. Or am I not? Am I off about that? Do they have sort of an expectation of him playing or not playing?
I don't know that he's going to play, just because he's been limited both days. I think, actually, I need to look that up as I'm saying that to you right now. But he hasn't been full strength yet, and he hasn't been full strength in two weeks basically. And this is one of those that groin, hamstring, quad injuries, where it's kind of lower body stuff for these guys who have to make these explosive start-stop movements. You don't want to mess around with bringing a guy back too early, because the possibility for re-injury is really, really high. And so they are going to baby this thing until they're sure that he's 100% recovered. So it could be one of those things where he's limited, and then all of a sudden he's full go and he's back to normal, just because they're waiting until he's actually 100% to get him on there. So many times these guys play through like banged up shoulders or sore muscles and things like that, and that's different. Like with this one, I think they're going to be really, really. I think they already have been really cautious, particularly because Kelsey McRae's played well. So, you look at a position like Wilson's with quarterback, like where your option is Trayvon Boykin to go in. The drop off is kind of immeasurable there. With Kelsey McRae and Kam Chancellor, it's been much closer. McRae's aside from maybe a couple of the communication faux pas against the Falcons, he's been really, really good. So there's no rush from the outside or from inside the organization, rather, to get him back, because they know they can count on McRae.
Jimmy Graham also on that injury report earlier in the week with, listed as a knee, but, I'm sure that that was, he put a lot together there in the overtime to give Seattle a chance to, tie it and then ultimately a chance to win it. But after that, devastating knee injury less than a year ago, he comes back. There were so many questions about what Jimmy Graham was going to be able to do this season and if he would be able to play. And a lot of people didn't even speculate that he would start the season on PUP. They just assumed that he would because of the injury history with that patellar tendon. Of course, he did not miss any games. He was certainly they were slow to ease him into week one, against the Miami Dolphins, getting just one target, playing sparingly in the second half, and not at all in the first half. Really, I don't think he got any snaps that week. But and then the next week, he gets 4 targets against the Rams, and he catches 3 for 42. But over the last 4 weeks, Jimmy Graham is playing at
24
the level,
receptions or something like that.
Yeah, so over the last 4 weeks exactly, he's gotten 9 targets, 8 targets, 9 targets, and 10 targets. So the exact amount of targets that you may expect from someone of his caliber that when he was with the Saints. And, he's caught 23 of those for 355 yards, 1,400. That would be a pace of 96 catches for 1,424 yards. Has there been any sort of talk what has Jimmy Graham sort of been saying about playing the Saints? And do you think that there's any insight that he has into New Orleans and Drew Brees that will be helpful to Pete Carroll and the Seahawks this weekend?
Well, so the first thing I can't answer because he has not spoken with the media this week. He will be made available this afternoon, but he hasn't spoken yet. So we don't know what his thoughts are on playing the Saints. He hasn't liked talking about that, so he hasn't liked talking about much, frankly, since coming here. So that's something we'll have to see, I guess. As far as insight for the Saints, he probably does. Although I think that offense looks a lot different in some ways without Graham because they just don't have that huge target in the middle. They went out and got Kobe Fleener, and he's been I don't think he's been very good for them at all. This is much more of an offense that pushes outside now with guys like Willie Snead and Brandon Cooks and things like that. So he probably can give them a little bit of insight, maybe into Brees's traits and where he likes to go. But this this defense doesn't need a lot of tips going up against Drew Brees. They've had him, they've seen him multiple times, and they've had a lot of success against the Saints. I remember those 2 games. I think it was at the end of the 2013 regular season, and then in the playoffs there. And this is a defense that loves the challenge of going up against an offense that throws the ball a lot. And they've had tons of success against those offenses. So I would anticipate the same on Sunday.
And what do you think of Jimmy Graham's 3 touchdowns in 17 games with the Seahawks? Do you make anything of that? And do you think that, are there still people, do you still hear, whether it's the fans or do you still hear a lot, do you think that the team still has a lot of concerns about the way that Seattle is using Jimmy Graham?
I haven't heard it as much from the fans as I did that first year, obviously. But, I mean, that was a real thing. Him trying to come in and find a role in the Seahawks offense was a real transition because they didn't have a guy like him. I mean, there's one Jimmy Graham in the league, and they didn't have him, and then all of a sudden they had him. And I think they tried to force him the ball a little bit early in the season, and then it was, they got away from that. And they got away from him a little bit, and right before he got injured at the end of November, they sort of seemed to find a little bit of a rhythm with him. But he hasn't still become that huge red zone target that we expect him to see. Part of that is that he draws a lot of attention in the red zone, frankly, and it's opened up things for guys like Doug Baldwin, who, before last year, I think if anybody had said Doug Baldwin was going to be a legitimate, top red zone weapon for your team, people would have laughed about that. But, with guys like Jimmy Graham and with the threat of Russell Wilson running the ball, a guy like Baldwin can, use his incredible explosiveness and his route running to just get space and get open and become a red zone threat. So I do think that the touchdowns are something that they'd like to see increase, obviously. But if they don't, let's look sort of systematically at what's going on there. Is it because, defenses, when they get down to the red zone, are choosing to take away the one thing they can take away, which is, by doubling Jimmy Graham or giving him way more attention than the guys on the outside, and then making Wilson and the receivers beat them and stuff like that. So, I think it's something that it's all been working together. Right now, the offense hasn't been in sync. The rushing game hasn't been great. The third down conversions haven't been really good all year. So the whole thing is sort of a work in progress. But I think, like we've seen the last couple of years, I would anticipate the offense getting back on track in the second half of the season, and not maybe approximating what they did at the end of last season, which was, record-setting stuff, but just getting a little bit more consistent, getting a little more rhythm through the last 8 games or so.
Yeah, and I think that there is a lot of hope in Seattle right now for the Seahawks to have an offensive performance against the Saints this weekend that, boosts their overall season numbers and really makes everyone at least look a lot better, going up against a defense that is arguably the worst in the NFL. The Seahawks, are allowing 14 points per game this season, which is, I believe, tied or at least tied for first in the NFL. And the Saints are giving up 32.5 points per game, which is dead last in the NFL. So complete opposites on defense. The Saints are giving up more than double points per game over the last 2 seasons than the Seahawks are. So they're looking for that boost. But when you look around for that boost, hopefully, I think a lot of people are hoping for Russell Wilson to rack up a couple touchdowns. But a couple of the guys, I would say, actually, that he has not been throwing to very much are Paul Richardson and Tyler Lockett. And if you look at it, obviously Tyler Lockett had a good game earlier in the season and then got injured and, wasn't playing much on offense. Paul Richardson, he's been out there for all 6 games and he's been targeted less than twice per game. He has 83 yards. And at the same time, while a lot of fans I could see want to give up on Paul Richardson, he is 24 years old, which is, not unfathomable for some guys out there as being old rookies. If you're a Frank Clark or, maybe he's only in his 3rd year. So Paul Richardson could get healthy and have a long career in the same way that, say, Jimmy Smith of Jacksonville did after having missed, I think, his first 4 or 5 seasons almost in the NFL, was with the Dallas Cowboys before coming back, to revive a healthy career with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So is Paul Richardson healthy and just not a part of the offense because of how much time he's missed and the guys ahead of him? Or do you think that there still are some lingering effects that are keeping him from contributing to the team? And do you think we'll see more of Tyler Lockett?
I think it's not. I don't think it's related to Richardson's health. I do think it's more of an issue as far as like who are you going to take off the field to put him in there to get him more touches. Doug Baldwin's your number one guy. Tyler Lockett, you mentioned, though he hasn't looked the same since suffering the injury against the Rams there. And then Jermaine Kearse is a guy who I think a lot of fans look at and say, well, like, oh, he's kind of just a guy, or maybe Richardson could be an upgrade, and maybe he could, but he's a guy that Russell Wilson trusts and that he knows, how to work with Wilson when Wilson's doing the scramble drill stuff. He is a good blocker in the running game. Paul Richardson, I've seen him. He's a willing blocker. He really goes out there and tries, but he's such a slight guy that he's not an incredibly effective blocker on the outside. So that could be part of it. But I think it is just one of those. These receivers, man, they don't get a lot of opportunities to shine. They get very little as far as targets go. Generally, very little as far as just opportunities to make plays, and they have to make them when they count. And I think Richardson actually has done that this year, but the way this offense runs, they're not going to, I think, bring in a guy to get him the ball just for the sake of getting him the ball. They've got their kind of philosophy, which is stay balanced, maybe predicate everything on the run. And then, the guys who are probably options 1A and 1B are Baldwin and Graham. And so those other guys are really kind of fighting for what's left of the touches after that. So I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Paul Richardson, if he's a guy who isn't retained in Seattle after his rookie deal is done, for him to go somewhere else and have, a nice career as like a number 2 wide receiver or something like that. I wouldn't be at all shocked about that. I do think that kind of his ceiling in Seattle is fairly low. Let's say that.
Yeah, it's interesting to see what will happen next year, with Paul Richardson and Tanner McEvoy obviously is a player that a lot of fans like. Do you see Tanner McEvoy's role increasing as the year goes on? Do you think that they've seen stuff now to the point where he could be more than, say, a player of opportunity that you throw in there for, it seems like they really use him in those situations where they need to get something going, but he's not, out there for 40 snaps a game. Do you see his role increasing?
No, I don't really too much this year for the same reason. It's just like they've got their guys in Ball and Person and Lockett as their three top guys, and then you'll see guys like McEvoy and Richardson, I think, come in on sort of a more limited basis and for specific packages and things like that. But he's a guy who, they really like what he can do in special teams. Obviously, he had a huge punt block against Arizona and has shown some flashes. He's just learning the position. He played so many different things in college, and even he played safety for his first couple months here. So he's just learning how to be a wide receiver, and I think they really like his upside as kind of this big-bodied receiver that, the kind of guy that we always thought Pete Carroll was going to try and eventually get when he was first coming to Seattle, like his Mike Williams 2.0. And I don't know if McEvoy can be that guy, but I think they really like the way that he works. I think they really like the way he has taken to special teams and really embraced special teams. And that gives him an opportunity to develop. I think of a guy like Deshaun Shedd, who did the thing on defense where, they really loved what he did on special teams. They really liked the way that he came to work on special teams. And he eventually worked his way into a role where he's been, a fantastic player for them this year. So would I be surprised to see Tanner McEvoy do that, in a couple of years? Not really.
It would not be a Seahawks chat without some addressing the complaints about the offensive line. The Saints do not have a very dangerous defensive line. This is just a terrible defense, and I don't feel that is a statement of controversy. That being said, perhaps it is the worst offensive line in the NFL. I think that there are definitely we can't deny the faults, though I think that there are improvements being made in the middle of the offensive line. And now an injury to Bradley Sowell on the left tackle side. Any thoughts there on Bradley Sowell's availability for Sunday? Because I know that we're going to see injury reports later, but assuming that he doesn't play, how comfortable is the team with George Fant now and, say, in a couple weeks when they start going up against some better defenses? I can't hear you.
Well, for a fan, I think they really do like him. I think that aside from his athleticism, which he's obviously a great athlete, he's got good size, good feet. They really like the way that he's positioned. Before, guys, we've heard this.
You're breaking in and out there, Steven.
I don't know. Al didn't participate Wednesday or Thursday. Pete Carroll, I think, an out shot that he might. But I much this week, so I think they're going to probably go with Fant. This might be a good opportunity for him because he is going up against a defense that is not stout against the run, pass rush. And you'll get to see kind of what he's able to do maybe as a baseline, and then moving forward, see how he stacks up against those better defenses in the league. But I'll go with him. And then if that doesn't work out, Marcus Webb at left tackle. Take issues at the tackle spots. I think that Gilliam
really in and out there, Steven.
Probably there. So.
I'm
sorry. I don't know. I think maybe my Wi-Fi. I can hear you.
Okay, yeah. I think if I were to recap what I think I picked up there was George Fant likely playing this weekend and giving coaches a chance to show what he can do, and Jamarcus Webb perhaps being the backup option if that does not go well, and then seeing what happens against some of the stronger defenses down the line. Steven, do you see, obviously I think that trade rumors and the marquee side are a little bit short-sighted and unreasonable in terms of Joe Thomas or Joe Staley. Do you see the Seahawks making any moves at tackle in the middle of the season?
Well, Jason Cole of Bleacher Report just came out this morning and said that they are actively seeking some help. And so, he's been ahead of a couple of things before. He's also been, ahead on some things or he's reported some things that haven't come to fruition, which is not necessarily an indication that it wasn't true. The information just didn't come together. So these are hard. These deals are hard to make in the middle of the season. And particularly when you've got a scheme like the Seahawks offensive line that is a peculiar scheme in a lot of ways with the zone blocking, who they feel can come in and play right away. You don't want to trade for a guy and then have to train him for 3 weeks or 2 weeks before you get him on the field. So, a guy like Staley to me would make a ton of sense. And specifically because you've got this Super Bowl window with this defense and with Russell Wilson and you don't want to blow a year of this team potentially because you've got such a bad situation on the line. But also, this is not a team that's going to mortgage its future to bring in one player. If they've done deals when they thought they could have kind of, the Harbin deal or the Graham deal where it was the missing piece. And maybe if they think that that's going to happen this year, that'll be it. But, they like draft picks just like every other team. They like to hoard them. They like to get as many as possible. And I think there are 11 first and second year guys on their 2 deep right now. They like, they've had to play young players because they can't afford the kind of veteran depth they've had in the past with, big contracts for guys like Wilson, Richard Sherman, and Earl Thomas, things like that. So young players are at a premium, and I don't know if bringing in another high-priced veteran into the plan moving forward, then again, they are always looking to improve the roster. Pete Carroll said as much in his press conference this week. I asked him about, how difficult it is to do deals. And he said, it's not that hard because you're kind of always looking. It's just a matter of when the right deal pops up, you got to jump on it. So if they feel like that happens, I think they'll make a move this week.
There's a lot of concerns about the offense, 28th in scoring, 27th in first down, 26th in touchdowns, just 5 of those by Russell Wilson, 1 by Trevone Boykin, 31st in rushing yards per carry, and a lot of that, coming down to Kristen Michael and the health of Thomas Rawls. Is there a belief that Thomas Rawls will be able to play against the Buffalo Bills on Monday night in 2 weeks? Or a week and a half? Is there a belief that will happen, or is there just hope and speculation that maybe it could happen?
According to Pete Carroll, that's the plan, is that he started running this week, and then he's able to practice next week ahead of that Monday night game. Now, he hasn't been listed as a participant at all in practice, and if he's just doing some kind of running drills or something like that, they don't have to do that. So I guess we just don't know, until we actually see him on the practice field, until we actually get some feedback as far as if he's able to put 2 days in a row and come back and bounce back from practice. We really don't know what his situation is. But I think it's become clear to them throughout the first, 6 games of the year that while Kristen Michael's a nice player and they really do like what he brings as far as his explosiveness and the way he hits the hole, and they really do like the way he's matured. Thomas Rawls is their guy, is the guy who's going to be their number 1 back when he comes back, if he's healthy, because he gets those chunk plays. He was a guy who was, so good after contact last year, led the league in yards after contact, and they're just not getting the same kind of production or toughness out of the run game without him in the lineup. And so I think they're really, really wanting him to come back as soon as possible because they're really missing him. And I think they're missing him maybe even a little bit more than we all anticipated they would.
And finally, while there are concerns about the offense, there's fewer concerns, I think, justifiably about the defense. First in points allowed, third in passing touchdowns allowed. A lot of the touchdowns that they've allowed, you could scratch off as, being either in garbage time or, an unfortunate circumstance like the one against the Jets with the fumble recovery. And, looking up against outside of the third quarter against the Falcons when they gave up 3 legitimate touchdowns to Matt Ryan, and, giving up a touchdown to Brandon Marshall at the end of the first half. That's the only touchdown they've allowed in the first half. A short run by Ryan Tannehill, 2 garbage time touchdowns to the San Francisco 49ers. This team is second in points per drive allowed, tough against the run, tough against the pass, solid pretty much all over the field. But are there any concerns, not just with, let's say the typical injury concerns, but would you say that there's any concerns or weaknesses on this defense, whether it were, Sam linebacker, which it seems like they've sort of mitigated by simply not playing Sam linebacker as much this season, just the loss of Bruce Irvin has turned into the loss of that position in some way, and they haven't seemed to have any lack just because of the numbers that I just cited. Any concerns with Jeremy Lane's play this season, or do you think that overall, all across the defense, the 11 guys or the 10, the 11 guys that they put out there are pretty much the best, they're happy with everyone out there, or do you think that there are any concerns or weaknesses on the defense?
There aren't too many. I think that they're pretty happy with how they've played this year. There's the communication issues against the Falcons that were very frustrating, and you obviously saw Richard Sherman have a tough time with that one. And you mentioned the Sam linebacker spot, which I think maybe all of us coming into the year overrated what that was going to be, because it sort of has been phased out of the defense. Jeremy Lane's gotten a ton of play. He hasn't maybe been as good as last year. The second half of last year when he came back. But I think, guys like Deshaun Shedd have been excellent. He's been as good, I think, as any Seahawks corner since Byron Maxwell's final year here, opposite Richard Sherman there. So, that's really good. I think they've upgraded from last year immensely just by not having Kerry Williams in there to start, and by keeping Lane inside and really not moving him outside. Shedd's been so good. And then the linebackers are crazy good. Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright are not only, I think, underrated around the league. I think they might be the best. If you took 2 linebackers from any team on the league, you'd have a hard time finding 2 better than those guys. And the way they play together and the way they play off of each other is really something. And then the line's been great. Even with injuries, with Michael Bennett being banged up, with Frank Clark being banged up, with their tackles being banged up, and Jaron Reed missed a game. They've been really good. So I don't think there are tons of concerns for this defense heading forward. It is just sort of the injury thing, making sure that a guy like Kam Chancellor comes back quickly and comes back healthy. And then they are, just trying to avoid those big ones to their major contributors. But I think overall, they've got to be thrilled with the way that the defense has played, given some of the adversity they faced early in the season. This is going to be one of the better, I think, Seahawks defenses we've seen in this run of really, really excellent defense. So, that's what they're going to hang their hat on.
Yeah, it is a fun defense to watch. It's a good defense to watch, and definitely going up against the Saints, arguably the most fun and interesting and exciting offense in the NFL. It'll be a really interesting matchup between Drew Brees versus Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, and the Seattle Seahawks defense this Sunday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And that'll be broadcast across most of the nation on Fox. So definitely check that out. And just in the same way on the other side, seeing the worst defense against a struggling offense from the Saints to the Seahawks, also something that should make for an interesting game, if nothing else. This is it for Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur for fieldgoals.com. Follow Steven on Twitter at SCohenPI. That's Cohen, not like the Cohen brothers. And check out the SeattlePI.com for all of those great Seahawks stories and those injury updates coming from you on Friday afternoon right now today on Friday. So that's it. Follow us on Field Goals on Twitter at Field Goals, and have a happy Halloween.